silent inquisition. 'Cause when the morning comes, some will stand, some die young. It's a silent inquisition. The golden girl with fire eyes takes his hand and it takes on her disguise. To the dark, another soul will fall. Stand alone, I'll take the shortest straw. Who are you and who am I? Should we laugh or should we cry? In a silent inquisition. 'Cause when the morning breaks, we'll see who had what it takes. In a silent inquisition.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for tuning in. I hope you can all hear me. Looks like everything's working on this end. So this is my second microphone Q&A. The first one is up on YouTube. And the other day on the newsletter, for those of you who aren't subscribed, I have an email newsletter for the Roswell Pro audio product line. I solicited questions, and I got a bunch of really great questions. So if you submitted one, thank you. I put some together for this episode. And if you sent in a question that isn't in this episode, it'll probably be in a future one. I feel like it's going to take me a while to get through them all. So really great submissions. Thank you, everyone, for helping out with that. And so let's get right into it. The first question was posted actually to the first Q&A. There was a comment by someone who calls himself The Pick. And the question was, are there other capsules besides the 4 popular ones? And then he names them. Or are they all pretty much some sort of version of one of those 4? Are there other capsules that we should be looking at besides these 4? So that's a really great question. I love that question. And the reason is that it demonstrates an understanding of the reality that the capsule is the most important component in any microphone. And I've said this in other contexts, but just to set the context here, the capsule is the transducer in the microphone, and transducers in general have the biggest opportunity to affect the sound of whatever it is that's passing through. Just like in a speaker system, if you change the amp, most people won't hear the difference between one amp and another. But if you change the drivers, meaning the speakers themselves, most people would probably hear that. So in a microphone, the circuit can affect sensitivity and gain and distortion, but most of the tone of the microphone comes from the capsule. So anyway, the question is, are there other capsules besides these 4? And so here's the 4 that he listed. And now this is a slide from a presentation that I did called How to Build a Mic Locker. So if you are interested in that, then that's up on YouTube. Sorry, distracted here for a second. So the 4 capsule types are, from left to right, the CK12, that was an AKG design, the K47 and K67 from Neumann, and then on the right side, the M7 from Gefell. And that presentation that I mentioned goes into ways to visually distinguish those. And the reason that presentation is all about those 4 capsule types is because those are the most common, and they also represent very different sort of families of sound. Now the question is, are there other types? And this is where the question maybe assumes a little bit too much, because I think the idea there, and I'm totally projecting here, so forgive me if this is not what you intended. I'm speaking to the questioner. The question seems to assume that, yes, I agree that sonic diversity is important, and also that having microphones with different capsule types gives me a diverse array of sounds. And yeah, all that is true. At least I agree with all of that. But I wouldn't go so far as to say that every K47 sounds the same, or that every K67 sounds the same. So to ask, are there others besides these that we should be looking at? If the assumption is that those are 4 sounds and that's the only 4 you're ever going to get, that wouldn't really be true. There's all kinds of different versions within those 4. Okay, from different sizes to different manufacturers and so on. But to take the question at face value, what else is there? Well, there are some others. There are rectangular capsules, and those have a characteristic sound. The argument in favor of those is that because the width is different from the length, that there's no single resonant frequency, which is true of a round capsule, right? There's only one diameter in a round capsule. And so a rectangular capsule has 2 resonant frequencies, one for the width, one for the length, and therefore they're both going to be lower amplitude. And therefore the resonance of that membrane will interfere with the material, with the sound less. That's the theory. It's an interesting theory. Is it true? I don't know. Certainly the best microphones in history, I should say the best condenser mics in history, pretty much all used round capsules. So, whatever flaws are inherent to that design are apparently not fatal. There are other shapes and sizes. Is it Erland makes a triangular capsule? I know David Bach has a sort of oval or egg-shaped capsule. So there are different varieties. Are they readily available? Not really. So I think this question was kind of about building. But the reality is, okay, let's take this 2 different ways. If you're building, I don't know of any rectangular or other shapes of capsule that are readily available. If you're buying, then yeah, you can go buy a Pearl mic, Pearl brand, or I think MyLab is the other one. Name's escaping me. The Audio-Technica AT5040 has 4 rectangular capsules in a 2x2 array. So those are all options if you're buying and you want to try some different shapes. They will sound different, no question. And the other thing I wanted to do with capsules, the pic is watching. Thank you for watching. I also wanted to show off a capsule. So here is a genuine Neumann K67, and this particular capsule has seen better days. If you've never seen one of these, this is a little micro SD card just for scale. So K67 capsule. Now this came out of an old U87, and someone tried to clean it. Cleaning a microphone capsule is usually a terrible idea because, as you can see, gold doesn't stick very well to mylar, right? So it's hard to see, but there is a piece of mylar film, very, very thin plastic film that's floating above a brass backplate at a very, very close distance. And you can't see it because that is invisible, right? I mean, the plastic is invisible except where it has gold painted on it, but gold doesn't stick very well. And so when someone was cleaning off the dirt, they cleaned off the gold as well. So this capsule doesn't work anymore. So Don't try to clean your mic capsules is sort of the takeaway there. But anyway, so it's, two pieces of brass bolted together and with the diaphragms mounted to either side. So this sort of cream colored thing here is called the clamping ring. And then you can see the two back plates with the seam in the middle. These holes, threaded holes there, are for mounting the thing. And then there's a wire coming off of the center. That's the electrode that carries signal off of the front of the capsule. There would be another wire that's attached to one of these back plates or both of those back plates. And some of these, and so I should say, sorry, this is a K67 type. What distinguishes a K67 is the drilling pattern. You can see the arrangement of these holes. See, there's a series of 4 holes there, and then there's 6 there. So that arrangement of 4 and 6 around the circumference, and the arrangement of the holes in a grid is characteristic of the K67 type. Other types of capsules have a different sort of drilling pattern. But that drilling pattern and the center termination, which is the screw in the middle, and then the use of dual backplates, those are characteristics of the K67 capsule. Now, why do I talk about this? Because this is the most common capsule in the world. Why is that true? Because it's relatively easy to make as compared to other designs. And so when Asian mic factories started mass producing microphones, this was the capsule design that they went for because it's relatively easy to make. Now let's look at a different one, which is not easy to make at all. So this is an M7. This is from a company called Thiersch in Germany. Originally developed by Neumann, made by Gefell today, also made by Thiersch. So this is a center terminated capsule, meaning there's a screw and an electrode in the center. This one does not have any screws around the outside. See this one, let's go back to this K67. This clamping ring has screws, and the purpose of that is to hold the diaphragm against the back plate. Okay. This one doesn't. This one has glue. It's glued down, which is very, very difficult to do well because the glue wants to leach inside the center of the capsule if you don't apply it correctly, and then it ruins the capsule and you have to take it apart and do it over. So that's the M7. This is a little bit smaller. This is about 32 millimeters outside diameter. These are 34 millimeters. So those are 2 capsules, 2 of the more common ones that people would, that you'd see typically. The M7 is less common because it's hard to make. The face of that brass backplate is machined to have a sort of trench in it into which glue is injected. And as I said, the glue likes to seep out and ruin the capsule. And so, and you have to do both sides, right? So you do the first side and it works out well, then you turn it over and do the other side. And then if the glue leaks on that one, you got to take the whole thing apart and start over. So very difficult to do well, but a very cool sound and not really like anything else. The backplate drilling pattern is similar to a K47, but the 2 capsules really don't sound the same. So that was my spiel on capsules. And so there's one other thing I wanted to do, actually. I wanted to give everyone a chance to hear what these sound like. So bear with me just one moment. Okay, so what I have in front of me are 2 microphones. I think the audio level should be okay. 2 microphones that are internally identical. The circuit is transformerless, made with really great parts. It's not doing any EQ, and then so the 2 mics have the same circuit and same JFET, and everything's biased properly and all that stuff. So 2 really nice circuits, but 2 very different capsules. So one of these is the K47, and it's actually a Neumann, German-made, official, authentic K47, and the other is a Neumann K67. And so, just for fun, I will not tell you which one is which, and I'm guessing a lot of you will be able to figure it out. Okay, so this is mic number 1. This is mic number 1, and this is mic number 2. This is mic number 2. So now I'll say the mic testing phrase that I use. It's an excerpt from Mixer Man's book. I forget the name. Zen and the Art of Mixing. I just made that up. I have no idea. Anyway, it's good because it has a lot of plosives and a lot of S sounds. Okay, so here we go. This is mic number 2. Whereas overdubbing is the process of adding parts for the purposes of improving a production. Whereas overdubbing is the process of adding parts for the purposes of improving a production. So that's the demo. I'll take a quick look at the comments, and yeah, I'll give everyone another minute. So again, this is mic number 1. Whereas overdubbing is the process of adding parts. Whereas overdubbing is the process of adding parts. So I think that's fairly obvious, but I'll let that cook for a second in your brains, and I'll tell you what's going on. Yeah, sorry, I'm just watching the comments here. It's fun. For those who don't know or haven't guessed, all the guesses are right. Number 1 is the K47. Number 2 is the K67. And here's the story on that. The K67 capsule, which is this guy over here that we looked at, the capsule itself has a rising high frequency response. So if you were to look at a frequency graph, you'd see that line going up to the right. When that capsule is heard in its raw state, which is what you just did, it sounds bright and frankly not that good. It's a little harsh. It's definitely too bright. It would tend to exaggerate S sounds. And the point of this is absolutely not that capsule is bad. Okay, there's nothing wrong with the K67, especially not that one, which is probably a $500 or $600 capsule from Germany. The point is not that it doesn't sound good. In that circuit, that capsule is not being handled properly. That capsule expects to have in-circuit EQ. It expects for the circuit to roll off the top end because the capsule has boosted the top end. What you just heard is like an upgraded version of a cheap mic, right? So this isn't a cheap mic. It's got fantastic parts and a fantastic capsule, but that recipe of K67 capsule, which is bright and a flat response or linear circuit, is what a lot of $99 microphones sound like. I should say $99 large diaphragm condensers, because that's kind of the recipe, is a flat response circuit and a bright capsule. So anyway, the mic isn't supposed to sound like that. Now, if you were to apply proper EQ in that, you would get something like my Mini K87, the Roswell Mini K87, in which the high frequency rise of the capsule is rolled off. And then you end up with something relatively flat, certainly flat-ish. Jacob comments that he loves that there's sweeps going on in the background. Yeah, we're madly testing capsules next door. Awesome. So I think that was my spiel on capsules. If you have any other questions about capsules, let me know, because I love talking about that stuff. Let's go to question number next. I'm going to read this for anyone who happens to just be monitoring audio. And bear with me, because this is a mouthful. In the condensers that you make, warmth can be produced either by tube saturation or THD from the transformer coupling. My worry is that even order harmonic distortion, when applied to an overtone spectrum, is not by nature harmonic, will end up sounding harsh because it will not be reinforcing harmonics contained in the sound sources themselves. Most of the sources that those types of mics are designed to capture are harmonic by nature. The inharmonic spectra of the instruments I'm using is more in line with something like a cymbal. So I guess the most direct way I could ask my question is, of your mics, which might have the sweetest sound when used as an overhead on cymbals? So, wow. So I love this question because it demonstrates someone is really digging into understanding how microphones work in an attempt to predict what's going to work on his application. That is fantastic. I love everything about that. Contrast with what is probably, sadly, the more common case. People buy what's on sale, or what someone who posted on an online forum recommended, or what a magazine ad shows off, right? Those are fairly sometimes better than others, but usually fairly terrible ways to pick a microphone. So this question demonstrates an incredible desire to try to understand and predict what's going to work. And I love that. But the challenging thing about this question for me is it's unanswerable. And there's a few implications of that question that I actually disagree with. Like, well, let me say that a different way. I guess it opens by saying that warmth is created by this or that. And first of all, I don't really know what warmth is. There's no bench test for warmth. And I think it means different things to different people. So when I see that word, I kind of back off because I don't really know what to make of that. And the same at the end, what sounds sweetest on cymbals? Well, that depends on your ears, right? That's a hearing question. That's not a microphone question. So there's a couple of issues with the semantics of it. But apart from that, what I ended up answering to this person is that it's a really, really smart question, but that no amount of theory or analysis is going to contain, 1/100th as much information as just listening to a mic on that instrument. Because you'll know in 5 seconds if you like it or not. Whereas you could spend 6 months trying to pick based on published specifications and that sort of thing. I get that that's hard, but that's why we offer a return policy on the microphones. When I used to have a real job, we talked about something called analysis paralysis, and I think that's a little bit applicable here. The idea, at least in the boardroom, was that you can spend so much time trying to understand a problem that you never actually make any meaningful progress towards a solution. And I'm not saying that this questioner was doing that. That's what this made me think of, that if you find yourself getting so deep into the analysis that you're locked or frozen, then maybe it's better to make a choice and go record some music and see how that goes. So that was that. Let's go to number 2. Czar asks, what are the benefits of using a tube mic for vocals? So I think Czar understands very well what the benefits are, but I appreciate the question for the benefit of everybody else. Let's take a step back. Why tube mics? In the old days, transistors didn't exist, and so tubes were the way that sound got amplified. So that was the choice. Nowadays, you have a choice between them. You can get a solid state mic, you can get a tube mic, and there's various combinations that use both, and maybe other things as well. But tubes tend to lend certain characteristics to the sound of a microphone. Whether they're good or bad is, of course, up to the engineer, because this all comes down to what people like to hear. So the way I think about this is tubes, as compared to a solid state mic, the tube mic would tend to have a higher noise floor. It would tend to do more audio compression. It would tend to be more microphonic. So let's take those one by one. What does it mean to be microphonic? A microphone should be microphonic, shouldn't it? No. Microphonics in this context means that it picks up sound in ways other than through the capsule. And tubes are not the only component that can be microphonic, but they are absolutely, especially old tubes, can be. And what that means is when you tap it, you'll hear this, actually any of a variety of sounds, from a dull thump to tinkling glass. It can sound like wind chimes. Now, in practice, you're not going to be knocking on your vocal mic during a track, right? I get that. However, to some degree, the tube can be excited by mechanical vibrations directly from the voice or through the floor. Your voice is probably not exciting the floor of the room enough to have it travel through the stand and the shock mount and into the tube. But by singing directly at a microphone, it is conceivable that the vibrations of your voice could cause that to shake a little bit. And, maybe that sounds cool and maybe it sounds bad. And it really depends on a million factors, or at least, the critical ones would be, the voice and that tube and what kind of sound you're going for. There's microphonics aren't going to be as loud as what's coming in the capsule and is the intended sound of the microphone, and yet they are part of that mix, right? So what's coming from the microphone is certainly the sound that it's supposed to be capturing and putting out, but also there's various kinds of distortion and noise that are just buried in there. And sometimes that stuff is good. It adds character, like circuits that add a certain kind of distortion can be magical. So don't misunderstand that, the only good microphone is one that is, pure and pristine or whatever. That's not my point. The point is that all these other sounds, all these extraneous sounds that are not really part of the input signal, end up being part of the output signal. And it's up to you to decide whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. So microphonics is one of those. What else did I say? Compression. So, and none of these are universal truths either, because microphones can be engineered a variety of different ways. But in general, as a general statement, it's generally true that valve or tube microphones will do some compression to the audio signal, which means your transients get squashed a little bit. Now, again, that's not on its own a good or a bad thing. It's just a thing, and you decide if you like that or not. And then there's various other factors like noise. I think that was the first thing I said. So, a good tube mic wouldn't be noisy. As tubes get old, they can become noisy. And so that's just something you have to be aware of. If you're recording a loud vocal, it probably wouldn't matter unless that microphone is broken. Let me say that a different way. The inherent self-noise of a tube microphone probably doesn't matter if you're recording something loud, unless the microphone is so noisy that it's actually broken and you can just kind of hear that hiss in everything, no matter what you record. For very quiet sources, you might find that a tube mic is just too noisy, meaning there's just too much hiss in the background of the sound that gives you a result that you're not happy with. So the benefits of tube mics, I guess I've kind of turned this around to, why wouldn't you want to use a tube mic? Which is not really my intention. So what are the benefits of a tube mic? Well, they can sound like other mics don't, right? So if they give you a sound that you like, then that's great. If they don't, then you use something else. And as is always the case, this is not a general statement that tubes are bad or good. These are just tools. There aren't bad colors. It depends what you want to paint. So recently, one of my high-profile clients told me a story. He actually texted me. He was so excited. And he texted me and he said, something happened today. And I know he's on some sessions that are for an album that's coming out soon. So I get a text from him that says, something happened today. And I'm like, uh-oh. And I write back, like, good or bad? Like, am I going to be happy about this? And he says, we put the Delphos up for a vocal session against my U67. I'm like, yeah, and did it fall? Or did it work well? I mean... So I write him back. I'm like, dude, you're killing me. Jump to the chase or whatever. So finally, I just called him, or he called me, and we chatted. And the fuller story is that he has a U67 clone. It's not an original vintage Neumann, but it's as close to that as can be. I'm guessing it even has the correct metalwork on it. Neumann has a patent on that metalwork, so you can't copy it. But I believe this particular mic might actually have the actual correct metalwork. But in any case, he's had this mic for 10 years or 15 years, and he's been carrying it around as his go-to vocal mic from session to session. And it's always been just the one that he knows, he trusts it, he loves it. It's, according to him, it's beaten vintage U67s at a couple of well-known New York City studios. And but he put it up. He had time in the session, this day last week, to put it up next to a Delphos 2, which is a mic that we make under the name Roswell. And he said we couldn't tell them apart. We had the guy sing into both mics, and the artist and I on first listen couldn't really tell them apart. And then on subsequent listens, I realized the two are 98% the same, but the Delphos is 2% more hi-fi. Now that's a great result. The Delphos 2 is not intended to be a U67 clone. By any stretch. It's not a tube mic, for example, but it does aspire to that similar frequency response, basically fairly flat, very wide bandwidth. And that comparison's been made before. U67 to Delphos 2 has been made before. So, so I guess the point of the story is that it's difficult to generalize about the qualities of microphones because it kind of comes down to the specific mic and also, the singer. It could be that on a louder or quieter delivery, there would have been more air between those two, meaning a bigger difference between those two microphones. So you kind of have to try it and see. Let's check out what we're doing here. So, all right, that was that one. Oh no, that was this one. Good. Next question. Mini K47's overheads, should I put them away between sessions? So this is a good question. Short answer is you don't need to. It's up to you. Most Mini K47s come with one of these, which is a microfleece cover. And the idea is that you put it over your mic, and then it keeps the dust off. So that would help. Now the reality is dust gathering on your microphone is probably not going to cause a problem, at least not during your lifetime. Way back in the day, churches would hang microphones, I guess, from the roof or near the choir loft or something. I mean, the idea was that they could record the choir. And now, there's a mic that you can't reach, certainly was left exposed to the inside of the church, getting dusty for many, many years. But the reality of the fact is that, a decade's worth of dust is going to contaminate the mic a lot less than 2 hours of someone who just ate like garlic lemon pasta for lunch singing from 2 inches away. So a little dust probably won't hurt anything. Cover it if you can, but I wouldn't stress about it at all. I think it's more important that the mics are up and ready so that when you're practicing or playing and an idea comes up and you want to record it, you're ready to go, because it's happened to me. Couldn't tell you how many times I'm playing, right over here, and something cool comes out and I'm like, oh, I should record this, but my rig is 15 minutes away. I mean, now I'd probably just grab my phone, but if you need 15 minutes to set up and record your cool idea, it's gone. Okay. Why is it that mic manufacturers don't want to produce mics with a very flat frequency response? This is an interesting question. And I can't speculate what all mic manufacturers do or don't do, can and can't do. I can hazard a couple of guesses. Number one, I'm not sure how much market there is for truly flat microphones. And I'll clarify that idea in just a moment. The best mics in history were not flat. And so, if you were a marketing guy in a microphone company, I think day one, your, fist banging on the table point that you're trying to make is, let's make a U47 clone. Never mind that that's impossible, but for the sake of argument, no one's going to be banging the table and saying, let's make a ruler flat microphone, because what's the precedent for that? So that's one part of it. Second part of it is, it's really hard. It's hard. And so when you come back to the first point, you say, okay, I'm not sure there's a market for it, and it's really hard. Then it's like, okay, really, why? And so let me back up though, because it's not a dumb question. When I was coming up and researching microphones, and I'd look at these frequency graphs and I'd see all kinds of bumps and dips and all this stuff, and I'd think, why doesn't someone just make it flat? Then I can EQ it the way I want. If I want some of 2K, I can add 2. If I want 4, if I want 8, if I want to take away 500, blah blah. Just make it flat and let me do the engineering. But the reality is, most frequency response comes from the capsule, and capsules aren't flat. Okay, there are some that are flat-ish, but you're still talking about plus or minus a dB or 2, so they're not really flat. Second thing is, circuits tend not to have like notch EQ filters. In a microphone, it's relatively easy to roll off the low end, and it's slightly harder, but relatively easy to roll off the high end. But if you said I need a 1.5 decibel dip from 5,500 to 7K, that would be really hard, and it would be hard to do consistently as well. So, I think you kind of need to do that. Like if you could either make a truly flat capsule, or you could do a whole bunch of DSP to fix the capsule. But then what you're going to find is that there's some differences between capsules. So it's not uncommon to see a dB or 2 or 3 difference from one capsule to the next. So you've got your fine-tuned DSP to fix your Gold Master capsule, and then take the next capsule off the line. You're like, it's not flat anymore. So now I'm speaking about this at a very detailed level. If you're okay within a dB or 2, then yeah, there are plenty of flat microphones. I think the Mini K87 is within a dB and a half or 2 of flat. The Delphos is even flatter than that. But if you want to be sort of pedantic about the word flat and mean literally like ruler flat, then that's harder. The exception would be there are some Omni capsules that are much flatter than directional capsules. But then you have the issues of Omni. Do you want to record in Omni, or because that's its own thing? Again, not good or bad, but it's its own thing for sure. Okay, so this is a great question. As a mic beginner, what mistakes should I try to avoid? Okay, so I have one main answer, and at the risk of oversimplifying the issue, I think if you attend to this answer, it will save you a lot of heartache. And it's a painful answer, painfully obvious, because the not for this questioner necessarily, but I think for some people, some of these questions come from a place of decide this for me because I don't want to be responsible. So anyway, here's the answer. The answer is how to avoid mistakes is to use your ears. So what does that mean? It means that regardless of a magazine interview where you saw a Grammy-winning Mix with the Masters producer using microphone X on a vocal and getting great results, you can buy that mic, you can buy his preamp, his compressor, you can replicate his entire chain, but you're not going to have his skills or that room or that singer. And what that interview maybe doesn't tell you is that on a different day, on a different singer, he used a different mic and a different preamp and so on and so forth. However, so you can't just copy something and expect the same results. But if you use your ears, you will avoid a lot of problems. So I'll give you a slightly embarrassing example from my own history, because I know better and I didn't do it anyway. I had someone come in. I was trying to put together a bunch of samples in short order. I had a singer come in and she was going to sing a 10 or 20 second phrase through each of like 12 different microphones. Not necessarily for publication, but just for my own library and analysis, because I don't sing. And to the extent that I certainly don't want to hear myself sing a bunch of times in a row. That would be, I'd stop making microphones, I think, if I had to do that. But I had her sing a bunch of things. And because I don't really have a setup that lends itself to that, I don't have a tracking room and a live room here. I've just got one room. And I didn't take the time to set up a proper headphone thing. So she had the only pair of headphones. And I thought, I know what I'm doing. I'm going to set up some absorption behind the mic, put the mic up. She's going to sing. And a third of the way through, we put up a mic, and for whatever reason, it didn't fit quite in there, and I had to raise it. And so this and that, and then I'd play back, and I don't remember the specifics. I think I didn't end up using any of it because at least that one sounded terrible because something was wrong with the setup, and it was basically picking up a whole bunch of room. And so it sounded completely different from the rest. So I couldn't do the frequency analysis that I was hoping to do. It was a total fail. And why? Because I didn't listen. I didn't monitor it because she had the only headphone mix, and I didn't take the time to set it up so that I'd get good results. So, I did the setup, I did the session, paid the artist, she went home, and then I was like, well, that was a waste because I can't use it. So that's my best advice. To avoid mistakes, use your ears. I suspect a lot of the people watching this have other ideas, and I would welcome those comments either in the chat or in comments below the video. And then maybe in a future episode we can talk more about that. But I think that's a really good question. So yeah, comments would be welcome on that one. So that was that. Next one. In the comparison videos on YouTube, the Mini K47 seems to have an extra presence boost, whereas the Mini K87 seems more flat. Is it better to use the K47 if you want the extra high frequencies in the mix, or would you stick with the more flat response and just EQ it? Okay. So thank you for that question, Stu. I am going to nitpick this question a little bit. So I would agree that the Mini K87 is more flat than the 47. That's absolutely true. The Mini K47 has a presence bump around 4 to 5 kilohertz. But you have to be careful of a couple things. Number one, all presence boosts are not created equal. The frequencies matter. So 4 to 5 kilohertz is a very welcome frequency band. So that sounds good to a lot of people on a lot of sources. And that's why that mic has been so successful for us. I mean, it works on a lot of voices. It works on a lot of guitars. 4K is a frequency band that a lot of electric guitars are turned up in. I've kind of mangled that sentence, but on drum overheads, it works really nicely as well because it tends to downplay the cymbals and tends to bring out the drums and some of the attack on the toms. So that frequency response is really great for a lot of sources. But if that was shifted up to like 8 to 10 kilohertz, it would be harsh and wouldn't sound very pleasant. And you'd, like on a voice, it would accentuate, mouth sounds and things like that. On drums, it would be like all cymbals all the time. So let me refresh this. So the part about use the K47 if you want the extra high frequencies. So I guess I would push back on that a little bit because I don't think of the K47 as a bright mic. I think of it as a sort of mid-forward mic. Now, if you want to talk about 6 to 7 kilohertz, yeah, it's a little brighter than the K87, but that's where the K47's boost is coming back down, whereas the 87 is just sort of flat through that range. But to the key of the question is the very end part, and this is the part that I like. Use this mic if you want this response is basically what it's saying, or would you stick with a more flat response and just EQ it? And the answer is the former all day long, every session. So let me say that a different way. The question seems to be asking, or at least I'm interpreting the question to mean, can't I just take a flat microphone and then EQ it the way I want it to sound? And I talked about this a little bit before. That was a little bit of foreshadowing. And the answer is no, not really. It's so much better to get the sound that you want at the mic. And that is why when you go into a recording studio, they have a whole lot of mics because they all sound different and they're going to be used on different sources. They're going to be good at different things. So let's talk about why that is. Number one, if the singer can hear himself or herself sounding great, he or she will give a better performance. Number two, you don't always mix the stuff you track. And so you don't want to record a super flat vocal and just figure the mix guy is going to make it work. What you want to do as a tracking engineer, and honestly, even if you are the tracking and the mix engineer, meaning you're recording yourself and you're going to be mixing this, next weekend, you want to nail the sounds during tracking. You don't ever want to commit something to tape or disc or whatever that is flawed and you're going to have to fix it, whether that's a performance issue, tuning issue, or just the wrong mic choice. Some problems can't be fixed. I talked about this in the first episode of these Q&As. Very bright sounds can actually become more distorted through digital conversion, and that can't be undone via EQ later. So I think what any professional engineer would tell you is that they want the sound right at the mic. They want the sound going down to tape or to hard disk to be as close to finished as they possibly can. So yes, I would pick the mic that gives me the sound that I want. And part of the reason for that is that when you are doing EQ, and I would welcome people who spend more time than me mixing to chime in the comments or in the chat. I think what you'll find is that when you're doing EQ to a track, subtractive EQ is safer, meaning reducing frequencies is usually safer. When you boost, you're not just boosting the signal, you're boosting noise and distortion too. And certainly with a good mic and a good preamp and a good clean signal chain, there's not a lot of that, and you can boost a bit. And sometimes you need to, and you can get away with it. But as a general thing, I've heard it said many times by mix engineers that you're safer doing subtractive than additive EQ. And so this question, you know, this idea that you can get a flat mic, and then if you want it to sound like a mini K47 or whatever, you just, you know, boost 4K. I think the results of that will be less than appealing. It won't sound quite the same. And I think you'll have some issues with that. So really good question. Next one. Actually, I'm going to take a quick peek at the comments, or the chat rather. And when I was watching back the first episode to put in the chapter markers, I was extraordinarily annoyed by the dead air while I was trying to read the chat. So sorry about that. I'm going to try not to do that here. But I definitely can't read and speak at the same time. So I don't see anything super problematic like, hey, we can't hear you. Yeah. Okay, good. Thanks for sticking around, everybody. So is there a better microphone for higher range vocals and a better one for lower range vocals? Marcus Davis. Number 7. Okay. So, no, that's my answer. I think, and again, I would love to have feedback from people who have, who spend their days mixing and tracking, but I would say no, because I think great microphones tend to sound great on a lot of sources. Now they do tend to get pigeonholed a little bit. You know, most famous female vocal mic, Elam 251. Okay, most famous male vocal mic, U47. Okay, we've heard that. And yet Barbara Streisand uses I think it's an M49 actually, but, you know, K47 Capsule, similar in tone. So despite there being some kind of pigeonholing, you know, I do think that doesn't apply to ranges. So male and female, okay, so there's some go-tos with, you know, for male and for female perhaps, but I've never heard of anyone say, well, this is my soprano mic, and this is my baritone mic, and this is my tenor mic. I haven't heard that. It seems to me that voices represent a relatively small range of frequencies, and most microphones can kind of handle that range of frequencies and beyond. So no, I don't think you need to have a low voice mic and a high voice mic. I think that most voices differ in other ways that are more important, such as sibilance and volume and things like that. I think those would affect microphone choice more than the sort of band of frequencies that are home. Okay. My question for your next broadcast concerns mic bleed. Recording a singer-songwriter, there is mic bleed from vocal to guitar mic and vice versa. How do your cardioid patterns stack up in that scenario? Okay, really interesting question. Because polar pattern is determined for the most part. Let me think this through. One might expect that I would have thought this through before the broadcast, but in fact, I was setting up cameras and microphones. The cardioid, the polar pattern of a large diaphragm condenser capsule. Let's start with the simpler case. Let's start with a single-sided large diaphragm capsule. It's cardioid, period, full stop. And the relative width of that cardioid pattern is kind of determined by the architecture of the capsule. So as a mic manufacturer, if you give me a large diaphragm single-sided capsule, I can't really change the polar pattern. Perhaps there are guys who can with some sort of baffling. I don't know. I've never tried. Now in a dual diaphragm mic, you can, but I don't know that it's been done very much. So let me talk about what that means. So this is a certain capsule design. The general name of this design is Braunmühl-Weber. That's my pitiful German accent. My son actually speaks German, and he informs me usually through riotous laughter how bad my German accent is. But anyway, the general idea here is that sound comes in both sides, and the way the circuit handles the relative volumes of those two determines what your polar pattern is. So what does that mean? In cardioid, you're just hearing the front diaphragm. But if you mix in some of the rear diaphragm, then you approach omni. The more of the rear that you mix in, the more omni you get. Unless the rear diaphragm is reversed in polarity, in which case you're sort of subtracting. And so if you have front at one polarity and rear at the reverse polarity, you end up with figure 8. So the sides drop out and you have front and rear, but the rear's reversed polarity. Now there's different ways to think about this. So there are microphones that have both diaphragms active and two outputs. My DIY company, MicParts, had a kit, and we will reintroduce that kit at some point, called the multi-track kit. And it was basically a large diaphragm condenser with two complete independent circuits in it. One was wired to the front of the capsule, and one was wired to the back of the capsule. And then it had an XLR5 that would split into two XLR3s. So it's basically a 2-track or multi-track microphone. It's not the only one on the market. There's others for sure. The idea is that you record both channels, and then you can combine them later. So at mix time, you can say, let's make that a wider cardioid by adding in some of the rear in the same polarity. Let's make it a narrower cardioid. You invert the signal from the rear. Let's make it figure 8. You set them to the same level, but invert the rear. So the reason I explain that is just to illustrate this idea that you can, with a dual diaphragm capsule and a bunch of engineering inside the circuit, you can change the polar pattern of that capsule. But you don't see that very often. What you'd more likely see is you just make that a multi-pattern microphone or a dual output microphone so that the person doing the recording can change the pattern later. I don't know that I've ever seen a microphone that's 30% off of cardioid fixed because all that was happening in the circuit. Because it's you have to it doubles the parts cost on the circuit. You have to have a whole second circuit to do that. That's not really true. I guess you could just there's probably cheaper ways to do it than that. But still, it's a lot of complexity for not a lot of gain. And so the question is about, how do your cardioid patterns stack up? And I don't have proprietary polar patterns, and I don't know that anybody else does either. The K67 has its polar pattern. The K47 has its cardioid polar pattern. That's what you get. The other thing I wanted to say about that is small diaphragm mics often have better cardioid pattern control. And a couple of reasons for that. But I think in most cases, people are listening, engineers, especially on a limited budget home studio kind of situation. I think most engineers are listening for tone. I think it requires a little more experience to listen for things like off-axis response and width of polar pattern. But I would encourage people to try that. It is known that the K47 has a narrower than cardioid polar pattern. So if you have one of those, and then you have a K67 mic or a CK12 mic with a CK12 style capsule, you might hear some differences in the sort of width of that. That might be hard to hear on a mono vocal because you're hearing such a direct signal anyway. But if you had a larger instrument and you mic it from farther away, like, put a pair of mics on drum overheads or an acoustic guitar from further away, or a piano, then you might hear the size of the space in a different way. So that is definitely worth playing with because it's just another tool in your arsenal. And I think everyone can relate to the idea that you're in your home studio, you know your gear, you set up, you record something. But if, Greg Wells came in, he'd hear different things than you because he's been doing this for a long time and he's really good at it. And he might have suggestions about where to place microphones or where to stand, or let's move it over into this corner of the room. I remember a story years ago, probably read it in an interview in Tape Op, where when they went into a studio to record drums, they would pick up a floor tom and just walk around the live room, smacking the floor tom. Why? To hear where the drum sounds best in the room. And why not? It's not like the room sounds the same everywhere because, corners, walls, ceiling height, furniture, treatment. And why not? You know, you can have the best mics in the world, but if the instrument sounds terrible in the spot where it is, best mics in the world aren't going to help you. So anyway, to my point a moment ago, people with more experience might hear things differently, but the way you get there is to experiment and to listen for things. Yeah. Good deal. Okay, let's see if there's any questions here. So 1 Corinthians says, when I think flat, I think Earthworks DPA test measurement mics. Sure, SM81. I agree. Yeah, I think I mentioned that. Measurement mics. I mentioned Omni, but I was thinking measurement mics, so thank you for that clarification. Yes, there are flat response Omni mics. The thing to watch out for is that they often have less bass response. Okay, Omni is going to have less bass response than a cardioid mic will. Sorry, than a directional mic will. And you have to take that into account. Because if you put an Omni mic at the same place as a cardioid mic, for example, it might sound thin depending on how far you are from it. And that's because the directional mic has more proximity effect. And you're just used to that. You're just used to hearing that. But if it goes away, you'll miss it. Okay, Marcelo says, you're right, but in reality, you can get away with boosting a ton. Go see the crazy boosts Eric Valentine is doing in his mixes. Okay, yeah, recommended. I'm definitely not Eric Valentine, if there's any question about that. And so, yeah, I defer to that for sure. What was the first mic that I really loved? That's a great question. It is the Biodynamic M380. There's a photo of it on Recording Hacks. It's a brass mic. It's big. It's a dynamic, but it has more in common with one of those big kick drum mics than with a typical dynamic. It's not a moving coil cartridge. It's actually a headphone driver. Okay, so it's the speaker from an old pair of Biodynamic headphones that they put into this awesome machine brass housing. It has proximity effect for days. We put it up on a guitar cab in a mic shootout a couple years ago, which I don't think ever got published. I think it's still sitting in a Dropbox waiting for me to have 80 hours free to listen to them all and write my impressions. But we put it up, and the engineer, my buddy Adam, he just like his jaw drops, his eyes pop up. He's like, vintage, and he kept saying that word in that strange pronunciation over and over again. Great mic. What was the studio? Electric in Chicago has a couple of those. Yeah, it's a fun mic. I don't have a lot of use for it. It works on kick, it works on voice, but it's got so much character. Super cool. So here's an interesting one. So this is from Inventor. I'm making my own pop filter from the thinnest hole stainless steel mesh. That may be a response to an earlier part of the conversation that I haven't been able to read. That's a cool idea. There was a company that made a perforated mesh filter called, was it Stedman? I think it was Stedman. And it was basically a 5 or 6 inch black disc with a bunch of holes poked in it, drilled in it. And when you blow on it, I feel like the holes are maybe drilled at an angle going down, so the air goes in and then it gets deflected down. So the mic is here and the air is going down. And that's a cool idea. I think those are still made today. I feel like I have one with another company's brand on it. So those are worth checking out. Pop filters in general are a mixed bag. I've done this demo before, but there's really no way to put an object between a source and the microphone without hearing it. So I don't know if this will come through, but if I do something like this, it probably sounds different. For those who are just listening, I just put my fingers in front of the microphone. So pop filters have a sound. I know there are companies that claim to have a transparent pop filter, and I haven't tested them all, so that might be true. I would defer to the advice I gave earlier, which is use your ears. I think it matters too how close the pop filter is to the mouth and to the microphone. Sometimes those Stedman filters, I feel like I can kind of hear it whistling. It might be that I'm doing it wrong. I don't record vocals for a living. What I try to do is position the mic so I don't need that. Because if I've just spent a whole ton of time designing a microphone, I shouldn't probably do this. In the first episode, I was looking around for this, and it wasn't available. But so if I've just spent a whole ton of time putting together a super cool, I can't wait to release this microphone, and then the idea that someone else is going to stick it behind a filter that's going to alter the frequency response, that's kind of a bummer. I mean, I've tried like 12 capsules in this microphone before I found the one that I love. And so, but then someone wants to put a piece of pantyhose in front of it. Okay. So what I would do, your mileage may vary, is put the mic up here. And this is not my trick. And I've talked about this before. It was my buddy, Randy Coppinger, who is or was an engineer at Disney, recorded a bunch of tens, hundreds, thousands of hours maybe of Disney character voices, which reminds me of something else I should tell you. But I believe this is his trick. But when you put the mic up here, it has a couple of cool benefits. One, is this even coming through? Yeah. One, it records chest resonance. So if you look at it in profile, the mic is pointing down at the chest of the singer, but it's also out of the blast radius, right? Most people, especially if they're reading lyrics off of a phone or something, their head is tipped down. And so the exhalations are all down here and the mic's up here out of the zone. And so you don't need a pop filter, or probably not. So I think that's worth playing with as well. But for people who are making their own, more power to you. I will not be one to argue against DIY for reasons that are probably obvious. Dishwasher safe. That's a really good point. The idea that if you're sharing pop filters from one singer to the next, especially in a pandemic, being able to clean them is a pretty good one. Okay, so here's a question. I can't pronounce your handle. How much of a hypothetical difference is there between my fully modified MXL 990 and a MicParts S-47 or T47? Okay, so this is a question about the MicParts product line. So MicParts has a pretty broad selection of products, and we have a circuit that fits into the MXL 990. That's a great mod platform because those microphones are ubiquitous. That means there are tons of them out there. So and what is it? Why do you care about that? Well, because they're easy to find. You can find them on eBay for $30 sometimes, and it kind of doesn't matter if it's dead, which makes it an even better mod platform. Because if you buy it and it's dead, and you were planning to replace the entire signal chain inside of the microphone anyway, it doesn't matter that it's dead because all that dead stuff's going to go away. So MicParts sells a circuit that drops into the MXL 990, and then your choice of capsules. We talked about capsules earlier, K47 style, K67 style, CK12 style. So you can kind of pick your own voicing. Now that particular circuit is my implementation of the Schoeps transformerless design. And so to answer your question, it is very, very similar, almost identical to the S-47. So the S-47 is an all-inclusive microphone kit that has basically that circuit, a couple of tweaks. We just re-released the 990 kit a week ago with a couple of upgrades in it. For those who already own it, you're not really missing anything. The upgrades are minor. I just can't help myself. When I make something new, it's going to incorporate everything I've learned since the last time I made circuit boards. That's just my nature. So we just made a new one of those. But basically it's the same. So it's the same as the S-47. Now you mentioned the T-47. That's totally different. The T-47 is more of a KM84 style circuit. And that one, although that circuit doesn't have to be done this way, the way we do it is that we build it with some second harmonic distortion in it for character. We do that because it sounds good. So the T-47 would be a different thing. And so that would be the difference there. Yeah. So I'm going to take one more question, and then I think we're out of time. I really appreciate everyone sticking around. I have a lot of fun doing these, and I hope they're useful for people. Please do submit questions, leave a comment. I guess I'm supposed to say like the video. I guess that's helpful. I don't really know. I have no intention of becoming a YouTuber, but it can't hurt, I guess, if people see it. Anyway, thank you to everyone who's been coming to these. I appreciate the support. The last question is about electret mods. And so there's a question in the chat from Cam Shash, electret mic mods. And this question came in via email too, and it may be the same person. Electret mic mods. So let's back up. An electret capsule is a capsule that is pre-polarized. So if we go back to our old friend, the K67 here, this is not pre-polarized. This requires voltage to be put in before you're going to get a signal out. This is yeah, let's leave it at that. So that capsule won't work unless you're supplying voltage to it from within the circuit. Electret capsules are basically pre-charged, so they don't need to be fed voltage in order to work. Why would someone do that? I don't know. I can speculate that way you don't have to build a DC power supply into your microphone. So, and there may be sonic reasons for doing that as well. I've never really analyzed them. In practice, there aren't a lot of electret capsules on the market that are readily available for installation into DIY products. I mean, let me say that a different way, actually, a more honest way. There's a million electret capsules out there, but you don't want to use almost any of them because they tend to be small, and smaller capsules are noisy, and so you're not going to want it on vocals, and I'm not sure that they sound so great that you'd really want it on anything else. There are a couple of exceptions. Primo has some good ones. The TSB, 2555 capsule that we sell through MicParts, that's a really good one. So there are exceptions, but in general, there aren't, I couldn't even tell you a third electret capsule that I would chase down and recommend using. So I don't see a ton of sonic benefits to those inherent within their being electrets. Secondly, microphones that have electret capsules are probably built to be inexpensive, which usually means that they're made with surface mount circuit boards, which invariably means that you can't really upgrade them because surface mount circuit boards are a pain to work on. The parts are really small, hard to see, and even if you are willing to operate with a microscope and get those things off the board, there's no room to put on something better. The circuit boards are hard to trace, so unless you have a schematic, you don't know what the thing's doing. So, I wouldn't we sell mods for like the BM700, BM800. Those are on eBay for $15. But the mod is, open the mic, throw out everything that's inside, and put in a new capsule and a new circuit, and then it sounds really nice. So it's not an electret mod. You're buying an electret mic that is a donor body for something else entirely. If I've misinterpreted what an electret mod means, that's kind of the best I've got. So yes, I think that's it. Once again, thank you, everybody. Tune in sometime in the future for part 3, and I'm out.